Hello, Piba Aztecs. This is the third part of the joints lecture. So we'll be looking in this lecture at ROM, or range of motion, and stability of a joint. So the range of motion and the stability of a joint are affected by 7 different things. So for example, one thing that the range of motion and stability in a joint is affected by is your muscle tone. So I don't know, I should have got a picture of that, but like the muscle bound bodybuilders and weightlifters, you know how they can't fully flex their elbow joint because their giant bicep gets in the way. So that would be an example of the range of motion being affected by muscle tone. I'm going to try this again. Okay. Oh no, I don't want that one. Actually, I just want a laser pointer, but it won't give it to me. Okay, so muscle tone is one of the type of articular surfaces of the bones in the joint. Where's the joint? Well, anyway, what kind of articular surfaces are there? So where the two bones meet, that would be the articular surface. We'll talk about that. And the strength and the tautness of the joint will affect the range of motion. The number of ligaments and tendons in a joint affects the range of motion of a joint. Hormones also affect the range of motion of a joint. And soft body parts. So for example, if someone is very obese, instead of having a giant muscle there, that would affect the range of motion when you're trying to flex your elbow. You could have a lot of fat over the top of that muscle. That would affect the range of motion. And then disuse. So I don't know if you've ever had a cast on for any broken bone, but I have. And then you try to flex that joint after a cast has been on it for a long time. Definitely you don't have the range of motion that you had before you got the cast. So let's look at muscle tone. So number one, range of motion, stability of a joint are affected by muscle tone. We probably know this. In this cartoon, it shows here the muscles attached to bone via a tendon. And there's a low level contraction of muscle, or low level of muscle tone, that is in place. So that helps stabilize the shoulder joint. And then two subcategories of muscle tone are proprioception and agonist and antagonist muscle groups. So we'll talk about the proprioception a lot when we talk about the physiology of muscle. So basically in this cartoon at the bottom, you see here's the bicep, and you take a piece out of that and then you enlarge it, and you can see here's the muscle. All this striated stuff is a muscle, and embedded in all your skeletal muscle is this thing called a proprioceptive muscle spindle. And what this thing does in this purple capsule here, we'll talk more about that later, like I said, but it helps you know how much your muscle is stretched. So this is a really important stretch receptor inside your skeletal muscle. There's also pain receptors in your skeletal muscle that will also affect your range of motion. And then agonist-antagonist muscle interactions will limit the range of motion. So for example, we could use this same cartoon down here at the bottom. If you're flexing your elbow, then the biceps muscle is the agonist and the triceps muscle is the antagonist. So it's kind of working against the action of the bicep muscle. The second thing that can affect your range of motion and stability is the type of articular surfaces of bones in a joint. So you probably know this from the last lecture, but here's the humerus, here's the ulna, here's the elbow joint, and you're flexed here, right? Because you've decreased the angle of the elbow joint. So then if you go to extend your forearm, because this is a hinge joint, your range of motion will not allow you to go all the way back or to hyperextend your forearm at the elbow joint. Number three, third thing that affects the range of motion and stability is the strength or the tautness. And tautness is kind of like tightness of ligaments. So you probably know people that are really tight and they have less of a range of motion than a person who is not so tight. So the strength and tautness of ligaments in tendons and the capsule that surrounds your joints can affect the range of motion and stability. The fourth thing that can affect the range of motion and stability are the number of tendons and ligaments in a joint. So if you look over here in this cartoon, here's the femur, down here is the tibia, and look at all these ligaments that are in your knee joint. So there's the posterior and anterior cruciate ligaments. There's the medial collateral ligament, and over here is a lateral collateral ligament. So obviously the knee is an important joint to protect. So it's got a certain range of motion, but it's also pretty stable because of all the numbers of ligaments and tendons. The fifth thing that the range of motion and stability can be affected by is contact of soft body parts. So for example, in this photograph, this woman has a large arm. A lot of that is due to soft body parts, so adipose tissue. That affects her range of motion. And then hormones also affect the range of motion. So for example, if we look over here in the cartoon, at the joint here at the symphysis pubis, and then here's the fetal head going through the cervix. And when you're giving birth, there's a hormone called relaxin that will relax this joint so that the fetus can go through the birth canal. And then we talked about this disuse of a joint, like if you have a cast, you also decrease your range of motion. So the movements of joints are also examples of actions for each muscle. So when you study the muscles for the lab practical exam, you'll name the muscle and then you'll give the muscle an action and the joint at which the action occurs. So for example, here's the biceps brachii muscle allows for flexion of the forearm at the elbow joint, or you could just say flexion at the elbow joint. Here's some tables which I like. This gives you a summary of the joint classes. So this is structural class. So remember you had fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. And the second PowerPoint YouTube video that I put up was on synovial joints. And then you had all these subtypes of synovial joints. And then this table, this is from Marriott, by the way. This just gives you the joint, and then the articulating bones are the two bones that come together, and then the structural type, if it's a fibrous or synovial or cartilaginous. And then this table also gives you the functional type of joint. So remember, a joint has a structural type and a functional type. And here's just more joints.